Hi. Before you're born, your body creates your strands of DNA, which the strands of DNA are basically a recipe for your body, how it will compose itself, how it will operate, if it produces the right amount of proteins. And sometimes, while your body is creating these strands of DNA, there can be a mutation in the strands, which can cause for disorders to be developed or a disease. Now, with epigenetics and newer science, it is showing that these mutations in your DNA strands can occur after you are born. Now, this happens when, as a child, you are in large environments that are induced by stress. According to the article Epigenetics in the Salem Press Encyclopedia of Science, written in 2019, the primary understanding of epigenetics holds that changes in a chromosomal level can affect the way that the gene activates or expresses itself. So, when epigenetic begins to happen in environments full of stress, it increases the chances of developing physiological and psychological disorders as you enter adulthood. Now, I will be discussing 2 examples of each during my speech. 2 psychological disorders that we'll be touching on are anxiety and depression, and 2 physiological disorders are AMD and osteoporosis. Now, first, I will begin with the psychological disorders. There was a study done on rats and their baby pups, and this study was basically the first study that was done that really uprooted the epigenetic science. Now, they chose rats as the study type because rats' genetic composition is very similar to our genetic composition. So, there were 2 groups. There was a group of rats and their baby pups where their mothers showed them a lot of care, consistently groomed them, gave them attention. And the second group of rats and their baby pups, they were neglected. Their parents did not show them affection, did not groom them. Now, the first group of rats who were consistently groomed, shown affection and love, they grew up showing no signs of psychological disorders, and when they grew up to have pups as well, they consistently groomed them, took care of them. Now, it was shown that their methyl groups were not changed or altered during this process. Now, the second group of rats and their baby pups who were neglected, they were shown to grow up to be skittish, have anxiety, depression. In the article Epigenetic Programming by Maternal Behavior, written by Weaver and a group of researchers in 2004, there was shown to be a causal relation among epigenetic state, gene expression, and the maternal effect on stress response in the offspring. So the baby pups who experienced neglect and no care, they were raised in an environment of fear. So when they grew up, they had anxiety, they did not sleep well, and therefore they became malnourished. And when they grew up to have pups, if they did, they treated them with the same neglect. Now, moving on to the physiological disorders, AMD is a age-related macular degeneration, which is basically an eye disease that causes loss of vision. In the article, an updated review of the epigenetic mechanism underlying the pathogenesis of age-related macular degeneration, this was written by Zioha and a group of researchers in 2020, states that if pathogenesis of AMD is solely controlled by genetic factors, then the disease should occur early rather than later on in life. And now the disease is one that should be developed in your elder years after age 60. And it occurs when your body begins to naturally break itself down. Now with epigenetics, if you were grown or you grew up in an environment full of stress and the methyl groups decrease, causing your DNA to overwrite itself, then it caused your body to rewrite its recipe and to develop this disease earlier on in life. So when you're entering adulthood, there are people who lose their vision early. Now, another physiological disease is osteoporosis, which is basically one that develops with age and causes your bones to become very weak and brittle. In the article Epigenetic Regulation and Mesenchymal Stem Cell Aging and Differentiation and Osteoporosis, written by Wang and a group of researchers in 2020. There is growing evidence that implies that epigenetic mechanisms are a critical regulator of the differentiation programs for cell fate and are subject to changes during aging. Now, this disease is also one that should be developed with age when you reach your elder years. But people who grew up with the stress-induced environment, they had much higher chances of developing osteoporosis in their early adulthood lives, rather than when their body begins to naturally break itself down. Osteoporosis is also a chronic disease, which means that once they develop it in their early adulthood, that they are now dealing with this for the rest of their lives. So overall, epigenetics can cause a lot of hardships on the body, and it is evident now that epigenetic factors caused by stress-induced environments can cause psychological and physiological diseases as you enter adulthood. Now, as I went over, some psychological diseases are depression, anxiety, and some physiological diseases are AMD and osteoporosis. Of course, the list is much larger than the one that I provided, but for the sake of the presentation, I included the main ones. Now, fortunately, with growing science, it is showing that these epigenetic factors can be reversible. So instead of having increased chances of developing these disorders, there are actually ways to now prevent and avoid them if you grew up in these stress-induced environments. Thank you.